Good morning. Thank you for joining me for our third installment of Disaster on Devil's Bridge, a book written by George A. Hough Jr. in the 70s about the tragedy of the steamer ship City of Columbus, which sank off the coast of Gay Head on Devil's Bridge, January 18th, 1884. In our previous installments of our Maritime Sunday Reads, we've talked about the ship, Devil's Bridge in general, the crew, the captains, and the passengers. One of the reasons that George A. Hough wrote this book is because there were many records lost. There were no women and no children saved, and something as simple as a passenger list was never officially kept. So this is the scene of the rescue of the ship City of Columbus. We have a Humane Society of the Commonwealth cutter there. The cutter Samuel Dexter rolled in to save people on the ship. And we also had two other lifeboats brought in by members of the community of Gay Head. So today we're going to talk about the disaster itself, the rescue efforts, and just a little bit about the aftermath. Chapter 5, Devil's Bridge. 7 hours out of Boston, the steamer City of Columbus had passed from Massachusetts Bay into the broad Atlantic and now breasted the three lights of Nauset on the back of the beach of Cape Cod. All of the captain and the crew set up on their watches for the night. It was what seamen called the starboard watch. Augustus Harding, 27-year-old second officer, relieved veteran first officer Fuller in the pilot house. Quartermaster McDonald held the wheel, as he had held it regularly on his watch since joining the ship 5 months before. It was 2:05 a.m., and the life of steamer City of Columbus was running short. A board of inquiry asked searching questions about the steamer's course up the Sound in the next hour and 40 minutes. Captain Wright and McDonald answered under oath. Mate Harding was dead. With Nobska's light dropping astern, Captain Wright took his bearings from the tarpaulin light, gave the new course to the wheelsman southwest by west, and watched the compass as the ship swung to it. 10 minutes later, with tarpaulin light still a mile or more distant, Captain Wright said he gave a second order to Mate Harding. When Tarpaulin Cove light bears north, go west-southwest. Now, unknown to all, the crucial moment had arrived. When the last course was given to Harding by Captain Wright, the Board of Inquiry reported, the ship was where any ordinary landsman could have taken her safely, past the fatal rocks without chart or compass, if any note whatsoever had been taken of either lights or land. So the City of Columbus steamed toward Summerland between moonlit islands dusted with snow. An hour passed and then minutes, and Second Officer Harding saw the bow watchman approach the pilot house. He lowered the window and heard Watchman Leary shout, "Buoy on port bow." "Port," ordered Harding. As the quartermaster swung the wheel, Captain Wright, rising to his feet, barked, "Hard a port." The wheel was still turning when the master looked out of the window. He expected to see another vessel. An ordinary hazard to masters and steam was the sailing vessel, dimly lighted, which loomed abruptly in his path. Steamers on the Sound were always overtaking and passing sailing craft. What Captain Wright saw, riding the tumbling seas, was the buoy on Devil's Bridge. The moonlit buoy was 200 yards away. Gay Head Light was almost a beam, towering 3/4 of a mile away. The hour, according to the captain's guess, was 3:15 a.m. Others thought it was nearer to 3:45. "There's a buoy. I'm outside it," exclaimed the captain. At that moment, the doomed steamer ran upon Devil's Bridge. From the captain's hard a port to the crash, it had maybe been 20 seconds. It was a gentle thump, Quartermaster McDonald thought. Captain Wright had felt a heavy sea hit her harder. Fireman Hines in the boiler room below knew the blow was heavy. To passenger James Brown in the steerage under the bows, it seemed like the report of a cannon. Steward Pittman slept on the undisturbed in his room forward on the port side of the spar deck. "Get the boats out," commanded Fuller. "What does this mean?" "Seems to me we are on Devil's Bridge," replied the first officer. "If so, we are lost." Spaulding asked how much deeper the ship might sink. Fuller, replying correctly as the moment, answered, "She can go no deeper." The purser told mate he was going to get the passengers out and hastened aft, not many moments behind the captain. Captain and purser knew there were life preservers in every stateroom. There was one under every berth, held in place by a bracket. There were 6 metal lifeboats on her davits, port and starboard, on the hurricane deck. There was a life raft lashed atop the deckhouse. The bill was posted and assigned to the crew to boat stations. There were drills every time the city of Columbus berthed at Savannah. The great light on Gay Head, which had failed to warn the steamer from the rocks, beamed sharp and bright from high atop the vineyard cliffs. Now the white and red flashes were becoming inviting assurance to the people of the Columbus that the land's safety was within her reach. For a little longer, Captain Wright could believe that as he knew his duty, and he did, he would get his passengers to shore. For a little longer, Purser Spaulding could see ahead of him duty to be accomplished. They would get the women, the children, the men, the life preservers, all into the boats. The city of Columbus was still on even keel, moving restlessly on the rocks as seas and gale hit her. From Chapter 6, we've got to leave the ship, gentlemen. Far aft of the hurricane deck, passenger Fred Tibbetts awoke to find himself standing mid-floor of the stateroom number 20. He became conscious of grinding and grating. It stopped, and he marked the contrasting stillness. His roommate, Frank May, clambered from his berth. The two dressed quickly, draped life preservers loosely around their shoulders, and entered the deserted social hall. "What has happened?" asked Tibbetts. "We've got to leave the ship, gentlemen," Captain Wright replied. Another passenger exclaimed, "Oh, what will become of my baggage?" "What will become of your baggage?" repeated Captain Wright. According to Tibbetts, "Try to think of your soul and pity me." Hough goes on to describe what happened in those harrowing minutes, according to any survivors. The Police Gazette had a cover sketch, February 9th, 1884, of a child being snatched by its mother. The seas were very rough that night. It was cold. Only 2 lifeboats actually left the ship. Many of the passengers were left stranded, holding on to the rigging that was still above the cold, dark ocean. At 7:23 in the morning, sunrise off of Gay Head. About a half hour later, a steamer called the Succor passed by. Unfortunately, nobody on the steamer ship saw the city of Columbus. More fortunate than most in the rigging was passenger Fred Tibbetts. He's one of the survivors where most of these accounts come from. And he talks about how he held on in that freezing cold, and he talks about different companions that were next to him in the rigging, and what happened to him and them. Here's a drawing of Fred Tibbetts. Help comes from ashore. Unfortunately, when they ran aground at about 3:45 a.m., help did not come to them until 9 or 10 a.m. the next morning. Chapter 14. On watch in the light tower on Gay Head, Fred Poole saw the white light on Devil's Bridge around 5 o'clock in the morning. He noticed the light did not move, and so called his chief keeper, Horatio N. Pease, a veteran of 20 years' service at Gay Head. Keeper and assistant watched and talked about the light, which was where no light should be. They agreed it must be a vessel on the rocks. Pease was also keeper of the lifeboat. The presence of this craft, painstakingly designed for the task it was soon to attempt, was owed to the gentlemen of Boston who met at Bunch of Grapes Tavern on State Street in 1786 to form the Humane Society of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The concise statement that is pictured on their seal, which was adopted in 1874, quotes, "I drew him out of the water." In little structures along the shores and mainlands and islands, the society had housed the famous boat which was designed for life-saving. All Humane Society boats were to be manned by volunteers, and as dawn neared, Keeper Pease sent his helper to arouse the little Indian community. It was slow work going to round the scattered homes, arousing occupants and explaining the alarm. A messenger intercepted a gang of which had risen early to cut ice from the ponds. The whole community, men, women, and children, straggled to the beach and gathered at the wharf. Responding to the summons were men who knew the sea in all of its moods and on all its oceans. They were schooled in boats and on their breaker-bound shore, veterans of whaleboats lowered away to the chase in the daring hunt New Englanders carried into far seas. Indians trundled the Humane Society lifeboat along the shore to the wharf. With a rope carried out to the pier, they dragged the lifeboat through the surf. Keeper Pease called for volunteers. There were plenty from whom to choose. He put the boat in charge of Joseph Peters, whose years as a boat steerer established him as one of the most skilled whalemen. For other places at the oars, the keeper chose Samuel Haskins, Samuel Anthony, James and Moses Cooper, John P. Vanderhoop, all natives of Gay Head, all American Indians showing in color and features and characteristics of their race. In the excitement, Keeper Pease forgot the life preservers with which the Humane Society provided with its boat. No one else even thought of them. One man even went barefoot into the lifeboat. Unfortunately, the sea was building up and they would soon fall prey to a nor'easter for the weekend. So even the handful of people that were saved and held in Gay Head very hospitably were to be marooned up there for the weekend. Here's a picture of the lifeboats with a crew. While oars rising and falling carried the second boat offshore, Keeper Pease prepared to make the use of his last resource for rescue. He sent a team of horses to Squibnocket, 5 miles away, where another lifeboat was sheltered. The boat was hauled to Gay Head Wharf and manned by others. Some other people in charge: James Mosher of Chilmark, volunteers, all bearers of old Gay Head names: Leonard Vanderhoop, Conrad Jeffers, Patrick Devine, Charles Grimes, and Peter Johnson. All 6 were lifelong familiars of small boats and open waters. The bravery with which they marked themselves that day was astounding. Of the 87 passengers who had left aboard the City of Columbus and the 45 members of her officers and crew, 75 of the passengers and 28 of the officers and crew were lost. Saved were 29 in total, 12 passengers and 17 of the ship's personnel. And like we mentioned before, no women and children were saved. There was definitely an inquiry into the incident. Captain Wright ended up losing his license. Other people were awarded honors, including the members of the Indian community of Gay Head. Money was raised. It was crowdsourced, actually, from around Massachusetts. They advertised it in the newspapers. And the Humane Society of the Commonwealth came to Martha's Vineyard to award funds to the volunteers as well as to award medals to them. and to award medals and funds that were raised separately to the officers of that cutter Dexter. One of the main purposes of George A. Hough in writing this book, as we learned our first day, was so that these stories weren't lost. He did not find very much information when he was trying to piece these stories together, and so he really had to go to people's families. And at the end of the book, he made a list, a roster of the ship's company, the passengers and the crew, and from where everybody was from. And I think to him, that was most important, to make sure that everybody's names, that everybody who was involved in this disaster on Devil's Bridge would be remembered. Thank you so much for listening to our Sunday Maritime Reads. My name is Nina Ferry Montanile, and we are looking forward to some presentations this coming week to celebrate our 6th annual Maritime Month in honor of Gordon Goodwin. We hope to see you around the library at more of our programs and wish you a good day.